Hello, word nerds. Welcome to the ad for my podcast called The Dictionary. My name is Spencer Parks. I host this podcast. I read the dictionary, the words, the definitions, etymologies, even more. I talk about it. I try to explain things. I also sometimes try to put in some silly jokes or silly sing-songy things. You know, it's just a fun way to read the dictionary. Sometimes I have guests on, and I hope that you will turn on this podcast, check it out, start from the beginning, and, enjoy this, what I like to call edutainment. Check it out in all the places that you can find podcasts.
Hello and welcome to How Did This Not Get Made? This is the podcast all about the movies you never saw, the scripts that were never filmed, and the ideas that never even made it to the page. My name is Daniel Kaka. And yes, it is only me in the studio. A bit of a behind the scenes. Whenever we do record, we actually do this over Zoom. David and I only did one episode in the same room together, and that was the Warner Brothers HBO Max episode where we talked about all the things that were being removed from HBO Max. But that's the only episode that we actually recorded in the same room with each other. We normally record over Zoom, mostly because when we first started this was during the pandemic lockdown, and that's how we started, and it was much easier for us to continue recording that way, and when it came to scheduling and getting guests, it was much easier for us to get them over Zoom rather than trying to get them into a studio. But enough about behind the scenes. We are here to read your emails, and I've gotten quite a few emails during our season. I know that this season took quite a while to put together. For those who have been following along, you know what's already happening. If you do not know what's going on, David has taken a sabbatical, or at least what we're calling a sabbatical. He's taken a break from podcasting, not just from our show, but from Pipe Dream Podcasts and the other shows that he's involved with. We're hoping for the best for him. He's just taking a break, taking a breather, and he'll come back to podcasting when he feels ready. In the meantime, it is just me today going over your emails and looking over what you've suggested, any corrections, all that fun stuff. So I figure let's just get started. We have an email from Andrew Cooter. He says, "Hey guys, if you're still looking for any suggestions for future episodes, I have a couple more ideas. The first one being The Rainbow Road to Oz. In the 1950s, Walt Disney bought the rights to the original Oz books by L. Frank Baum. Disney planned on making a live-action musical movie starring the Mouseketeers called The Rainbow Road to Oz. The project was scrapped in favor of Babes in Toyland. However, some of the musical numbers from the canceled movie appeared in the 1957 episode of the Disneyland TV series in which the Mouseketeers pitched the movie to Walt. Based on the vague plot descriptions they gave, it might have been a sequel to the 1939 movie, but it's also possible that it's just a standalone movie. Disney wouldn't make an Oz film until 1985's Return to Oz." Yeah, growing up, I really loved the movie. There was a babysitter of mine, I forget her name, but she would always put on The Wizard of Oz, and it always captivated me as a kid. I briefly remember Return to Oz. I know that there's a lot of weird and fun things that are in there, but overall it was not a great movie. It was one of those movies that was kind of swept under the rug. But seeing The Rainbow Road to Oz, that does sound very interesting, and I will put that in the list. The other suggestion we have is Dinosaur Planet. It reads, "You guys have said that you wanted to do more video games, and then this is a topic I've been obsessed with for years. In the year 2000, Rare, the developers of Donkey Kong Country, GoldenEye, Banjo-Kazooie, and many more, were working on their last game for the N64, an action-adventure game called Dinosaur Planet. The game followed a wolf named Saber and a fox girl named Crystal who traveled to the titular planet to save it and reunite it with Saber's father, Random. The game would have pushed the N64 hardware to its limits with its features like a huge open world, a complex story with deep lore, and fully voice-acted cutscenes. To make a long story short, the game was eventually turned into Star Fox Adventures for the GameCube in 2002 before Rare was bought by Microsoft. However, there is still plenty of remnants of Dinosaur Planet, most notably a full build of the game from December 2000 that was leaked in 2021. Video games are not really something that we go into very often. Usually I try to put in one per season, but this is a good contender. The next email we have is from Jonathan Egan. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. I'm sorry if I mispronounce it. But he says, I just discovered your podcast and started with the Wonder Woman episodes. I love your deconstruction of the Whedon script and wondered why you did not do the same with the David E. Kelly pilot. I've seen it, and while not how I envisioned Wonder Woman, I actually enjoyed it. I've been debating on whether or not I want to revisit Wonder Woman. I know with this season we did revisit Spider-Man, but there was a lot of stuff that was in Spider-Man. I know that we did touch on the David E. Kelly pilot in our Wonder Woman episode. I know it didn't go into very much detail. We didn't really go into the plot of the pilot episode, but we did mention its existence. I do remember that Pedro Pascal was in that pilot, or was going to be in the show, which is kind of ironic that he was later cast in 1984. But yeah, I think that is something to consider. And I really like doing the research for Wonder Woman. And it's definitely one of those subjects that I feel like I do need to revisit again. But yeah, I do like that idea though. Our next email comes from Daniel Dickholtz. Okay. And he says, I only came across your podcast just recently, which is surprising because I'm fascinated by film projects that didn't happen. And I was only scrolling through your episodes yesterday to find one to start with. The first of them, focusing on Ed Wood's I Woke Up Early the Day I Died, got my attention, partially because I knew that it actually was made, just never officially distributed, and partially because I had written 2 articles on it. One, an interview with the director for Fangoria magazine, and the other, an interview with Billy Zane for Starlog magazine, which was published shortly thereafter, back when there was still hope that the movie might actually reach theaters. I was really enjoying the episode, and I was shocked to hear my Fangoria article from eons ago being cited on a podcast. My name was going out to the listeners, and I was thrilled. Right up until I heard the host say, that can't be a real name. Yes, I did say that. I do want to formally apologize because as someone who also has a last name that doesn't seem real, and also had a last name that was definitely made fun of when I was much younger, I can relate to that. And for what I'd said during the episode, I do, from one Daniel to another, formally apologize. It has nothing to do with your character. And that article that you wrote was actually very useful to our research for the show. He goes on saying, and then one of the Horrors of Horror guests said, no, but that is an unfortunate name. While her co-host admitted that everyone was acting like 14-year-old school kids. Yeah, we were being a bit childish about that. I'll admit that. Just to clarify, yes, it is my real name. It's my parents' name. It's the name my wife took, and it's my kids' names. It's the name I signed on checks and official documents. It's on your driver's license, so on and so forth. Yes, I do believe that it is your name. My wife thought I should take you to task for degrading our name, but pointed out that you didn't degrade my article, just to put things into perspective. Besides, it's not the worst thing I've heard, and somehow a mishap like this fits the discussion of Ed Wood. Yes. There's also what Oscar Wilde once said, the only thing worse than being talked about is not being talked about. So, Daniel Dickholtz, thank you for writing in. Thank you for your fantastic reporting with Fangoria and Starlog. Like I said, I do apologize for making fun of your name, but as someone who also has a last name that's been made fun of before, I completely understand. Our next email comes from Dan Juntonin. He says, "Hi there. I think both John Hughes' version of The Pajama Game and Catherine Bigelow's Joan of Arc movies could have individual podcasts for the episodes. And there is evidence that Blue Sky Studios almost adapted one of my favorite childhood books. He provides a bunch of links to all these unrealized projects as well, some from Oliver Stone, Michael Mann, Paul Verhoeven, and Zack Snyder. We also have some from John McTiernan as well. This is a lot of stuff to go through for sure. I do like the idea of Catherine Bigelow's Joan of Arc. I know that we've kind of briefly talked about Catherine Bigelow like here and there. And I think I've talked about James Cameron enough to justify doing a Catherine Bigelow episode. So I do really like that idea there. So thank you, Dan, for those suggestions. Our next email comes from Daleen Clark and says, I was thinking if you could talk about the sequels planned for the movie Galaxy Quest. Ooh, Galaxy Quest. I do really enjoy Galaxy Quest. One of my favorite things about Galaxy Quest is the fact that Tim Allen was really the one who was cast in the lead role because the director of Galaxy Quest thought that he was the only one that could really understand being cast in a major television show and just kind of feel jaded afterwards. And I really like that. Plus, I've been to Utah where they filmed the rock monster scene there. So I'm very interested in where this goes. So he goes on saying, there's been a 2015 IDW comic series called The Journey Continues that acts as a sequel to it. Okay. Tim Allen has said he's read a good sequel script and Paramount Plus was wanting to buy it, but so far nothing has developed and Alan Rickman's death unfortunately doesn't help. Thank you, Daleen, for your email. I do like the idea of a Galaxy Quest sequel. I think there's something that you can do even if Alan Rickman is not part of the project. I think there is something in there. I will say that it probably will be a little tricky to do, given the reputation of that movie. And if you do create a sequel, it does really need to be good. But I do like going down this journey to see what the sequel would have entailed for Galaxy Quest. Next, we have an email from Chris, and he says, hello there. I'm a huge fan of your channel, and I've been listening to all your podcasts. Wait, does that mean the Weird Alphabet and all the other pipe dream stuff? I hope so. Anyway, I was wondering if you guys could ever do an episode of Martin Scorsese's unmade Hitman film, The Winter of Frankie Machine, based on the book by Don Winslow. The film was pretty close to being made, and I've heard there is even a full-length screenplay going around the internet. I think this would be a cool episode. Yeah, I think this would be really interesting, not just for a Martin Scorsese film, but to actually do a deep dive into Martin Scorsese's career, or at least his history in his career, because I think a lot of modern filmmaking techniques and a lot of what film is today, what movies are today, is embedded in what Martin Scorsese has done throughout his career. So I think that would be a really interesting episode. I know that I do have some blind spots when it comes to Martin Scorsese, but I think there's a lot that could be learned from that episode. So I really, really like that idea. I'm going to put that on the list. Our next email comes from Michael Nally. He says, hey guys, just listened to your Spider-Man episode this season and just wanted to say that's probably my favorite episode so far. I'd just like to point, technically there were 6 Spider-Man villains in No Way Home if you count Mysterio's broadcast in the beginning of the movie. It says here, grasping for straws. Yes, I mean, technically he is in there. The only reason why it doesn't work is just because they're not collaborating with each other. But you are correct in saying that there were 6. But until we get someone saying we're the Sinister Six, I don't think that's going to count. I would not be surprised that in the next Spider-Verse movie, if they got 6 villains together, even if it's just like an opening shot or if it's a really quick scene, I would not be surprised if they were to kind of touch on the Sinister Six. So here's hoping that there's going to be a Sinister Six movie in the future. But yes, you are right that technically there were 6 villains in No Way Home. Michael goes on to say, not sure if you guys were able to do these discussions, but I was wondering if you would consider the Sly Cooper film that was canceled in 2017, despite the trailer being produced, as well as DreamWorks' Me and My Shadow, a film that would have used both 3D and 2D animation styles for its main characters. Okay, yeah, the Sly Cooper film, I remember stumbling upon this movie when looking into like Blue Sky and even looking into DreamWorks. This would pop up a few times as like the animated films that never got made. So that would be interesting to look into. As far as DreamWorks' Me in My Shadow, I like the idea of having the main characters be both in 3D and 2D animation. I know recently we had the Chip and Dale movie, which actually had both characters be animated in 2D and 3D. It is interesting that we actually do have a movie that does have that premise in it, but it would be interesting to look into when that started and why they decided to do something like that. So I'm going to put that on the list, something to look into for next season. Next, we have an email from Christopher Sterniolo. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. If I'm not, I'm very sorry. But he goes on saying, "Hello, Daniel and David. I would like to suggest doing a canceled sequel to Elf as a possible suggestion for next season. I wish I had suggested it sooner, given Christmas is a month away, and this year marks the 20th anniversary of the original Elf movie. I'd be curious to hear your take on the canceled script, which didn't go through due to Will Ferrell wanting to maintain the purity of the original, in addition to his feud with the director Jon Favreau." Okay, yes, I have heard stories about Elf 2. I've heard that with Will Ferrell, he said that no amount of money will bring him back to do a sequel to Elf. And I kind of understand that. With that movie, that was really a miracle that it was ever put together. I think on Netflix, there is like a documentary series about I think it's called The Movies That Made Us, but they do talk about Elf and really how it was an underdog film. And I think because of the way that they made that movie, there was a certain magic that was caught because of that. And that's really hard to capture again, especially with how successful that movie is. I do like the idea of going into Elf 2. I am very appreciative that you have actually included the entire script for me to read through. So I might be having some fun reading, at least over the holidays, but I really like this idea of Elf 2, just to see what they came up with, and we can determine whether or not it really should be made or if it was even worth it. I was not fully aware of the feud that he had with Jon Favreau, although it kind of makes sense that the two of them have not worked with each other since. So that would be interesting to look into as to why they don't get along anymore. So thank you again, Christopher. Our next email comes from Shane Myers. He says, "Hey guys, great season as always. I have a few suggestions for y'all. I think an episode on the Dark Universe would be a great deep dive into the Universal monsters and what could have been." Okay, so I know we talked about the Dark Universe and the Universal monsters in our Creature from the Black Lagoon episode. I know I didn't dive too deep into it. I will say that when it comes to the Dark Universe and just kind of what happened there, a lot of it was like, it was all there, it was getting set up, and then just got shut down, and there isn't too much of a deep dive in there. I could try and look more into it. I know that I didn't want to go too far into it when it came to that episode because I wanted to focus so much on the creature, and I know that he was supposed to be part of the Dark Universe. Something that I could do a deep dive on is the early years at Universal with Carl Laemmle when he first started the Monsters universe, or at least the Universal monsters that were being produced at that time. I know that Karina Longworth has done a deep dive into the Universal monsters with her show, but I would like to kind of find like a cohesive story as to like why that worked so well and why the reintroducing of the Dark Universe didn't work so well. I know that they were trying to go off of the success of the Marvel or the MCU and trying to have everything connected, which I understand. I get it. That is a really interesting way to keep a franchise alive. But I think with Universal, they've kind of given up on this. I'm kind of speculating on this, but I feel like they've given up on their monsters or their dark universe and just kind of said, hey, you know what? Just any of our classic monsters, it's just going to be its own story. Shane goes on to say, another idea for an episode would be the Coyote versus Acme movie, especially because it was basically finished and it's still in the news as of late. Okay, with Coyote versus Acme, I know that there has been some issues over at Warner Brothers right now, especially with their animation department. Recently with Cartoon Network, I actually just saw that they left their building in downtown Burbank, so they're no longer there. I know that David Zaslav has essentially made one animation division for Warner Brothers, so it's not just Warner Animation and Cartoon Network. He kind of put them both into one, which from a logistical perspective, it does make sense, but I mean, I grew up on Cartoon Network and it is really, really sad to see that go. And I think a lot of the hangups as far as Coyote versus Acme, I think that's having to do with a lot of the mess that's going on with Warner Brothers as to why. This could be something to look into, and it could give at least a great update into what is going on at Warner Brothers. So I really like that idea because I feel like we can start going into what's currently happening with Warner Animation. Next, we have an email from Dan Juntinen. A lot of suggestions from Dan's out there, or at least emails from Dan. So anyway, Dan says, hey there, I have a few ideas. Ooh, and he's actually shared some links with that too, for future episodes of How Did This Not Get Made? Here's a script by Gerald E. Brown, the writer of Romeo Must Die, for a canceled 90s comedy Lobo movie that would have been like Jason Momoa's take on Lobo. Oh, okay. I wasn't fully familiar with Lobo, but he is a DC comic book character. It looks very demonic. Kind of looks like The Undertaker. Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, I am always looking forward to comic book projects, and that would be something interesting to look into. Thank you for that. The other suggestion we got from Dan was the James Cameron adaptation of Anne Rice's The Mummy. Okay. I am interested in this, not because of James Cameron, even though he's popped up quite a few times in our episodes, but because of Anne Rice. Now, my partner is a huge fan of Anne Rice, and we recently watched the new Anne Rice's Interview with a Vampire. And I know that with the Interview with a Vampire, or at least the vampires, there is so much more lore within the books than what was just in the movie or even in the show. So that would be interesting to look into, especially with James Cameron attached to it, which he doesn't really do adaptations. He mostly does a lot of his own stuff out there. So that would be interesting to see how he would take that on. And then the third and final suggestion that he got was from Blue Sky Studios. It was for the children's book Alienology by Dougal Steer. Okay, yeah, that would be fun to go into just because with Blue Sky, knowing what was left on the table as they were being bought by Disney, I know a lot of stuff got left behind, and I know we recently got a success story with Nimona because Nimona did finally get released, and this is going to be another Blue Sky movie that probably won't ever see the light of day, but maybe. We'll see. I would be interested in looking into that, though. And the last thing, this isn't really related to the podcast, but I think it's really fun. Dan Juntinen, he put in, it's not really his appearance on The Late Show, but there is a tweet of his where he suggested in the hashtag he who shall not be named, a good name would be the Vanity Manatee. That's really funny. I'm glad that your tweet was featured on The Late Show. That's a really fun tidbit about yourself. Also from Dan Juntinen, we got more stuff. He says, hey there, guys. I remember that Dean Piersot would have reunited with Galaxy Quest screenwriter Robert Gordon for a movie about Bizarro Superman. Ooh, that could have been made before Man of Steel. All right, you provide the links for that. Who knows? Parasot and Gordon could have been available for an interview individually or together about the movie and didn't materialize. Yeah. And there's a screenplay. Oh, and he actually provided the links to those. Neat. Yeah, I like the idea of a Bizarro Superman. I would be very curious as to what it would look like in a live action film. Diving into Superman again would be another one of those instances where we revisit a superhero. I know that we have revisited Spider-Man, so why not revisit Superman, one of the oldest superheroes still around? So yeah, I think that would be fun to go into. Yeah. And our last email is from Liam. He says, "Dear Daniel and David, or David and Daniel, whichever you wish to be first. It doesn't matter, but I appreciate the thought." He says, "Sorry for getting this in at the last minute. That's okay. I'm still able to read your email. Love the season and can't wait to hear what comes next season. Something I learned about one-word titles with animated movies. Apparently this started because Princess and the Frog didn't go super hot when John Lasseter was running Walt Disney Animation Studios as well. Though the reason was because the title was too girly and he asked for them to shorten the title. None is feminine at all when looking through the concept of the name Tangled. However, apparently, a bunch of other countries called it Rapunzel. Yeah, we really should have just called it Rapunzel. Anyway, seeing how well it did, we pretty much all know what happened afterwards. As far as suggestions go, I really kind of wonder, with John running both Disney Animation and Pixar, how much it affects Brave. Given his view on feminine things, how much was really lost. Hope 2024 becomes a year for both the podcast and you guys. Oh, thank you very much, Liam. I forget how much we actually dove into John Lasseter and his involvement with Disney Animation Studios and with Pixar. I know that he was a big part of both of them. I am curious to dive into a project that really goes into kind of his, I don't want to say mentality, but I guess his approach to filmmaking, creating stories, because there is something to be said about how John Lasseter really improved the quality of Pixar movies to the point where Disney finally caved and eventually bought Pixar. But there is a lot of downfalls to him as well, which I know led to him being let go by Disney and Pixar. I do want to find a project that maybe dives into that again. I know that when it came to us doing the Tin Toy episode, we only really covered the early history of Pixar, so it would be interesting to do a deep dive into what happened after Toy Story and look into that. I know we kind of briefly talked about it when we talked about Frozen. I mean, this is where this email came from with coming up with one-word titles, but I think we can do something with that. I think we can find something within Pixar that John Lasseter was heavily involved in and create something out of that. So that is it for our email episode. Feel free to keep on emailing me your corrections, your suggestions. I love hearing from you guys. It shows there is a lot of people who are interested in the same subjects that I am interested in, which is mostly just things that were canceled, the things that could have been, and the fun ideas that would have happened that are not in the zeitgeist, that are not in the world. I really do appreciate the support that's out there. I really appreciate the understanding that you guys bring to the show. This show is definitely something of a dream project of mine. It is a pipe dream project of mine, and I'm going to try and keep it running for as long as I can. If you want to support our show, obviously we have our Patreon. That is the Pipe Dream Podcast Patreon, where you can show your support. There are ad-free episodes there. You can take a look at the notes that I write for the episodes. There's a lot of stuff there. And if you can't support us financially, that's perfectly fine. There are other ways that you can support the show. You can rate and review the show. You can follow us on our social media. We are on Twitter at HDTNGM. And we are on Instagram at How Did This Not Get Made? You can see a lot of concept art of the movies that we are talking about in our show. They are an excellent follow if you are a movie fan. And then in the meantime, you can check out all of our other Pipe Dream podcast shows. Currently, we have Escape from Walt Disney. There's also Mystery Shack Look Back, who's actually come back to cover Over the Garden Wall. And if you're a fan of Homestar Runner, come on for Hookah Pods. I know they're currently working on new episodes, so hopefully we'll see those new episodes soon. And that'll be it for me. I'm going to go and start working on the new season. I'm really excited to put it all together. Hopefully I can find the time to do so. I really appreciate those who have emailed me, who have expressed what they would like to hear. And thank you, everyone, for your support. Thank you for listening. Thank you for anyone who has shared these shows with their friends, family, whoever you know as a huge film nerd. Thank you all for listening, and I will see you next season. Bye-bye.